Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk about the film The Beach Girls and the Monster, which is an American film produced in 1965. It is a beach party horror film. Typically 1960s vibe, women in the bikini, beautiful girls and shirtless men, and everyone with their hormones, and everyone on the beach and listening to music and dancing in the craziest places possible. It is this sort of film that is so bad that it becomes good and full of involuntary humor. So the film talks about Richard, who is a young guy who used to work with his father, who is a famous oceanographer. Richard used to work with his father. However, he quit working so he could hang out on the beach, surf, go to parties, have fun with his girlfriend. And of course, his father got very distressed with that. And we also know that a friend of Richard called Mark also lived in the house. He limped, and it was the result of a car crash caused by Richard a while ago. And it also lived in the house Vicky, who was Richard's stepmother, younger than his father, a gold digger, extremely selfish woman, and it's clear that he married just because this older man, who was Richard's father, had money. And then when things seemed to revolve around this, it starts to occur a series of murders. Those youths, they start to be murdered one by one by a monster that looked like a seaweed creature, but it was actually an actor wearing a costume of a rubber monster, a ridiculous costume, and he clawed the face of the youths before killing them. And nobody had any idea who the murderer was. We can see that Richard's family was rather dysfunctional. Vicky, his stepmother, she was basically a slut. She didn't treat her husband with respect. She flirted with other men, and she loved to humiliate Richard, and he lived at home, and her dream was that Richard left the home so she could have the home all to herself. And then the murders start happening. Then we can see, first it was two girls being murdered, and then we can see that a guy, a surfer, he was murdered too, while the youths were throwing a party on the beach at night. And then Mark, who is Richard's friend, he was passing by and saw a guy struggling with the rubber monster, and he ended up being killed. However, as Richard was passing, just at the time when that guy was murdered, some people thought that he could be the murderer, especially the girlfriend of the murdered guy. And then Mark was questioned by the police, and the youth started to be afraid. But they didn't let this spoil their fun. They still threw parties, they still went out at night. They were scared, but one thing has nothing to do with the other. They continued with their routine, which is basically a routine of doing nothing. No work, no study, all day long on the beach. They were clearly members of relatively wealthy families. They were clearly not from working class families, so they could afford doing nothing. So then time passed, and there was a murder inside Richard's home, Vicky was murdered. She received a letter which was supposedly written by Mark because she was flirting with Mark behind everyone's back. It was supposedly a letter by Mark, and then she went to another room of the house and she was murdered there. And then it seemed to be a little bit weird, and it seemed that it was Mark who was the murderer. But then, after a while, Mark was attacked himself. Remember that he lived in Richard's house. And then, one day, he was attacked by the rubber monster, and he was clawed. But when it happened, Richard arrived home with his girlfriend, and they saw the murder taking place. They couldn't save Mark's life, but they realized who the real murderer was. And it was actually Richard's father. He was so distressed that his son was no longer working with him. All of a sudden, he started partying all day long, all night long, stopped working. And he was so disgusted with that he was in a rage and started killing the people who were from his group of friends. And the murder of Vicky is because Vicky could no longer disguise her infidelity and the fact that she didn't really like her husband and she wanted to leave home. But Richard's father didn't allow that, and he said that he always kept what was his. He always kept his things. So Vicky's murder was connected with marital difficulties. And then the police was called and a chase started because Richard's father got a car and left home in a hurry. The police chased him. However, Richard's father had an accident and his car fell out of a cliff. And this is how the film ends. It's a very short film. Of course, the plot isn't meant to be taken seriously. The acting is not very good either. The dialogue is often laughable. As I said, it's full of involuntary humor. It's laughing all in the wrong places. Even though the film talked about serial killer, the theme, the subject, isn't talked about in a serious way. But it's a film that is extremely important as the symbol of an era. We can see the young people of the 1960s, the new habits, the new ways of seeing life, and the fact that they could go out and have fun, enjoy themselves, which was something that they couldn't do very much until then. And we can see all that. The bikinis, they became more common, and the fact of going to the beach and swimming and surfing, it became more common, especially among young people. And it's an interesting film from the historical point of view. But of course, if you take this seriously, you will find it bad. As I said, it's a big film, low budget film, and it is nice if you see this way. It's so bad that you can laugh of it. Of course, the actors and actresses, they did not become famous or Hollywood stars, but it's nice to get to know the work. And as I have mentioned in other videos, it's nice to see what people can do with little resources and how creative they can be. Because sometimes when people don't have much money to invest in a film, lots of scenery and lots of things to use, they need to be creative to make that story happen. And this is what we see in this film. And it's a short film. You can see something about fashion of the era, and it's an interesting film. about the acting, don't be ashamed to